The Sugar Act of the same year removed the heavy tariff on imported molasses, instated by the Molasses Act, while increasing the penalty for colonial smuggling to ensure colonies would pay their duties. In addition, all sugar-related items brought in the colonies were taxed extra. The act proposed by Grenville that created the greatest uproar in the colonies was the Stamp Act. This act required a purchase stamp on almost all printed material in the colonies. Newspaper, dice, official documents, and countless other written documents required such a stamp. This act was so controversial because it was the first direct tax Parliament placed on the colonies.
The act focused on paper products, which affected all groups, but specifically the intellectual class, such as lawyers, politicians, landholders, and other gentlemen. These men dealt with paper the most, as the professions required reading and writing. Targeting this influential group was a big mistake for the British, because these gentlemen possessed vast power in the colonies, and the means to create propaganda demoting the British and their taxes. The Quartering Act was the last straw for many of the colonists, which declared the colonists must house and feed British troops at any random moment.
Oh no, the Red Guard's coming!
March! Over and off for the British Guards! Hello, puppets. You must corner and feed us.
Oh dear.
Nice to sound from you. Can I get some bloody food around here?
Yes, sir.
Can I get a tartare and crème brûlée and a roast beef sandwich?
Yes, sir.
Very good.
As a result of the accumulating acts and laws, rebellion began to spring up around the colonies. Activist groups formed to oppose British officials and advocate for fair treatment of colonial citizens. Some high-class colonists also released papers, such as Letters from a Pennsylvania Farmer by John Dickinson. Violence and vandalism was also common. Attempting to scare officials out of town, many colonists tarred and feathered British supporters, burned and hung officials in effigy, and destroyed British property. Finally, colonists organized a boycott, and boycotted over 90% of British goods and products. One of the largest activist groups was the Sons of Liberty, who fought against the mistreatment of colonists.
So, Sons of Liberty, what do you want to do? These taxes are balderdash! We must unite against this tyranny! Let's burn stuff! Yeah!
Collecting stamps.
Oh my gosh, what's that? Yeah! Down with the stamp collectors!
In October of 1765, 9 colonies met together at the Stamp Act Congress and reaffirmed their belief that taxation should come from within the colonies only. With full opposition from every corner of the colonies, the British repealed the Stamp Act. However, colonial celebration was muted when Britain passed the Declaratory Act of 1766, which stated that in the future, Parliament had the right to tax the colonies in all cases whatsoever.
Charles Townshend, who filled in for the ill Prime Minister, took a large role in forming the acts that followed the Declaratory Act. Townshend followed Grenville's idea of taxing the colonies and placed new duties, commonly known as the Townshend Acts, on glass, paper, and tea. The income of these acts would be used to pay the salaries of high-ranked British officials in America. In addition, the Townshend Acts created the Admiralty Courts, which tried colonists accused of smuggling. These courts were known notoriously for not using a jury of peers and interest.
Opposition to the Townshend Acts occurred immediately. In Letters of a Pennsylvania Farmer, John Dickinson wrote that Parliament had the right to regulate colonial trade, but not to use that power to raise revenue. Only duties used to control trade or to regulate affairs of the empire were legal.
Also from these harsh taxes arose James Otis, declaring the phrase, "No taxation without representation." Americans thought that for Parliament to be able to tax America, Americans must be represented in Parliament. Britain, on the other hand, believed in virtual representation, where a member of parliament represented every member of the colonies, even though they do not have a representative.
Shame on Parliament! Shame on Parliament! No taxation!
We're just really angry with the British government because they're taxing us without giving us seats in the Parliament, and we think that they should only be able to tax us if we have representation.
Shame on Parliament! Shame on
None of that virtual representation, Balderdash.
Shame on Parliament! Woo! Woo!
In 1770, Britain introduced a new Prime Minister, Lord North, who decided to repeal the Townshend Acts. But the tax on tea was not repealed to remind the colonists that Britain had the right to collect taxes as they desired.
Eventually, direct and violent conflict broke out between colonists and British. Several colonists were harassing soldiers by throwing snowballs, and through a misunderstanding, British troops fired on the mob of colonists, killing 5 and wounding many. Next, the colonists attempted to oppose the Tea Act. The Tea Act stated that the old tea tax would remain, but the price of tea would be lowered in the colonies. Although Britain believed colonists would be satisfied with lower tea prices, colonists were brutally opposed to it. Lower tea prices meant it would be harder to smuggle tea into the colonies, and the citizens of Boston decided to take nonviolent action. 65 men dressed as Mohawk Indians boarded tea ships and dumped nearly 350 chests of tea in the harbor known as the Boston Tea Party.
Guys, it's the tea! Nice, nice. Alright. Get ready. Be careful. Quiet. Shh. Alright. On 3. Wait. Get your tea. 1, 2, 3. Go, 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 go. Wait, we need to fix the lock. We need to fix the lock.
In response to the Boston Tea Party, the Intolerable Acts were put into effect. The port of Boston was closed to military ships, town meetings could no longer be held without the governor's consent, and the Quartering Act was again put into effect. In addition, the Quebec Act was passed, which limited the land which the colonists could settle and increased the freedom of French Catholics, which annoyed many Protestants.
In response to the Intolerable Acts, 56 delegates met at the First Continental Congress.
We will raise and train militias of our own.
We will resist all measures that tax without our consent.
We must force George III to repeal all regulatory acts in 1763.
I want to boycott all British goods until the Intolerable Acts are gone.
Oh, hello. British General Thomas Gage desired to stop the growth of local militias. In April 1775, British troops marched to Concord to seize colonial arms stored there and arrest the leaders of militias. Paul Revere heard of the British coming and stated that he would light 2 lanterns if they were coming by sea and 1 if they were coming by land.
The British are coming! The British are coming!
In response to Paul Revere, colonial militiamen met the British soldiers at Lexington, but the British quickly fired, killing and wounding the colonists. The Redcoats then marched to Concord to find a larger group of colonial militiamen waiting. When the British decided to travel back to Boston, the colonists opened fire and continued to bombard the Redcoats as the Redcoats retreated. 275 of the British military men were killed, compared to only 93 colonial militiamen, which was quite the victory for the undermatched colonists.
Due to military incidents such as Lexington and Concord, the delegates initiated a Second Continental Congress in May 1775 to get the colonies ready for war. We shall elect George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army.
We will create a committee to supervise all foreign relations with other countries.
Colonists can now print money to buy supplies for the war.
We will send the olive branch petition to George III.
In July 1775, the olive branch petition was sent to the king asking him to formulate a happy and permanent reconciliation, but the king refused to receive the document.
Thomas Paine used the refusal as a springboard to write the document Common Sense. This document attacked monarchy and empire and helped convince many colonists that the colonies would flourish once it was removed from British control. With over 120,000 copies sold, this document became an immediate hit and gave the colonies one more reason to desire for independence.
On July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence was approved.
When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness.
And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.